The scream tore through the Wyoming dust like a wounded animal's last breath. "No! Please, God, no!" Every soul in Redemption Valley froze. The wedding was supposed to start in 10 minutes. Instead, Clara May Henderson stood in the doorway of the old timber church, her white lace dress trembling against her frame, tears carving rivers through the powder on her cheeks. Her father's hand was clamped around her wrist like an iron shackle. "You'll do your duty, girl," Jacob Henderson hissed, his weathered face twisted with something between desperation and rage. "This family's survival depends on it." But Clara wasn't looking at her father. Her eyes, wide, terrified, disbelieving, were locked on the man standing at the altar, the man she was supposed to marry in less than the time it took to say the Lord's Prayer. Magnus Thornwood. He stood 6'7" in his boots, broad as a barn door, with shoulders that had carried full-grown steers across flooding rivers. His arms were thick as fence posts, covered in scars and stories. Long blonde hair hung past his shoulders in warrior braids, and a beard concealed half his face. But it was his eyes that made grown men step aside when he walked into a saloon, pale gray, like morning frost on a wolf's fur. The mountain man, the legend. The loner who'd survived 3 winters alone in the Rockies, who'd fought off a grizzly with nothing but a hunting knife, who spoke more to his horses than to people. And now, somehow, he was supposed to become Clara May Henderson's husband. "I can't," Clara whispered, her voice breaking. "Papa, please, he's too big. Look at him. Look at me." She was barely 5'3", delicate as a spring flower. "How can you expect me to—" "Enough!" Jacob's voice cracked like a whip. The church fell into suffocating silence. 43 witnesses held their breath. The Reverend, old Pastor Williams, clutched his Bible so tight his knuckles went white. Magnus hadn't moved, hadn't flinched. He stood there like an ancient oak, expressionless, watching this girl, this terrified child woman, realize the trap her life had become. Clara's mother, Margaret, stepped forward, her own eyes red-rimmed. "Sweetheart," she said softly, "it's already done. The agreement was made. The land—" "I don't care about the land." Clara's voice rose, desperate, wild. "I don't care about any of it. How could you? How could you sell me like livestock?" The word hung in the air like gun smoke. Jacob's face flushed deep red. "You watch your mouth. This ain't about selling. This is about survival, about keeping this family from starving through another winter. Magnus owns half the timber rights in this valley. His lumber mill—" "I don't want his lumber mill. I don't want his money." Clara yanked her arm free, stumbling backward. I wanted—" She couldn't finish, because what she wanted didn't matter, had never mattered. Magnus finally spoke. His voice was deep, rough from disuse, like stones grinding together. "Let her go." Every head swiveled toward him. Jacob's jaw dropped. "What did you say?" "I said let her go." Magnus's eyes never left Clara's face. "I won't marry a woman who's being dragged to the altar like a calf to slaughter. That ain't marriage. That's slavery with legal papers." The church erupted in whispers. "Now you wait just a damn minute!" Jacob stormed toward the altar, his finger pointed like a weapon. "We had a deal, Thornwood. Your timber contracts for my land rights and my daughter's hand. You can't just—" "Can't I?" Magnus's voice dropped lower, more dangerous. "Last I checked, I'm the one with the ring. And I'm saying no." Clara's heart hammered so hard she thought it might burst through her ribs. Was he setting her free? But Jacob Henderson wasn't a man who accepted defeat, not when his pride and his property were at stake. He'd fought in the war, survived the long march home, built this ranch from nothing with his own bleeding hands, and he'd be damned if some mountain hermit was going to humiliate him in front of the whole valley. "You break this agreement," Jacob said quietly, deadly, And I'll make sure every landowner from here to Cheyenne knows Magnus Thornwood's word ain't worth the spit to say it. Your lumber mill won't get a single contract. Your business will be dust by spring." Magnus tilted his head slightly, considering. Then he shrugged those massive shoulders. "Reckon I've lived with less. Lived with nothing, in fact. Mountains don't care about contracts." He turned to leave. "Wait!" The voice was small, trembling, but it stopped Magnus mid-step. Clara stood there, her hands twisted in her wedding dress, tears still streaming, but something had shifted in her face. Something hard and resigned and heartbreakingly adult. "I'll do it," she whispered. "Clara, no," her mother started. "I'll marry him." Louder now. "But not because Papa's forcing me. Not because of contracts or land or money." She walked slowly toward the altar, her legs shaking with each step. When she reached Magnus, she had to crane her neck back just to see his face. "I'll marry you because at least you gave me a choice, even if it was just for a minute. That's more than anyone else in my life has ever done." Magnus looked down at this slip of a girl, this trembling, weeping, brave little thing, and something shifted behind his frost-colored eyes. "You sure?" he asked quietly, just for her. Clara nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. "All right, then." Magnus looked at the pastor. "Let's get this done before she changes her mind." The ceremony was the strangest Redemption Valley had ever witnessed. Clara's voice shook through her vows. Magnus's was steady as bedrock. When it came time to kiss the bride, he simply touched his lips to her forehead, gentle, brief, almost brotherly. "I won't hurt you," he murmured, so low only she could hear. "That's a promise." But as they walked down that aisle together, his huge calloused hand completely engulfing her small, trembling one, neither of them could have known the truth that was waiting in the shadows. Because 3 days earlier, a stranger had ridden into Redemption Valley. A stranger with documents that proved Jacob Henderson's land wasn't his to bargain with in the first place. A stranger who claimed that everything, the ranch, the livestock, the very ground the church stood on, belonged to someone else. And that stranger was watching the wedding from the back of the church, his hand resting on the gun at his hip, a cold smile playing at his lips. The game had just begun. The Thornwood cabin sat in the high country, where the pine trees grew so thick the sunlight came through in scattered coins of gold. It was larger than Clara expected, not the rough shack she'd imagined, but a solid timber structure with glass windows, a stone chimney, and a porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Magnus had barely spoken during the 2-hour ride up the mountain. He'd simply lifted Clara onto his massive draft horse like she weighed nothing, climbed up behind her, and started riding. She'd sat rigid in front of him, acutely aware of the solid wall of muscle at her back, the arms bracketing her sides as he held the reins. Now, as he helped her down, she finally found her voice. It's beautiful." Magnus grunted, which she was beginning to realize was his version of, "Thank you." He grabbed her small trunk, the one her mother had packed with her meager belongings, and headed inside. Clara followed, her heart racing again for different reasons. The cabin's interior was surprisingly clean, furnished with handmade furniture that showed real craftsmanship. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall. Furs covered the floor. Books, actual books, lined a shelf near the window. "You read?" she asked, surprised. "Sometimes." Magnus set her trunk down near a door that must lead to the bedroom. "Kitchen's stocked. Well, water's cold and clean. Outhouse is back left, but there's a chamber pot under the bed for night. I'll sleep out here. You take the bedroom." Clara blinked. "You'll sleep out here?" "Until you're comfortable." He wouldn't meet her eyes. "I meant what I said in the church. I won't hurt you. Won't force anything. This marriage is legal on paper, but in practice..." He shrugged. In practice, it's whatever you need it to be. Something in Clara's chest cracked open. Her whole body sagged with relief she didn't know she'd been holding. "Thank you," she whispered. Magnus nodded once and turned toward the door. "I've got work at the mill. Be back before dark. Lock the door if it makes you feel safer." He was gone before she could respond. Clara stood alone in the cabin, in this strange new life, and for the first time since her father had told her about the arrangement 3 weeks ago, she allowed herself to breathe. The first week passed in careful, quiet tension. Magnus left early each morning for the lumber mill in the valley. Clara spent her days exploring the cabin, cooking meals she'd learned from her mother, and trying to understand this strange, silent man she'd married. He was nothing like she'd expected. Yes, he was enormous. His presence filled any space he occupied. But he moved with surprising grace, was careful never to startle her, and left the best portions of food for her while taking the scraps for himself. And he was smart. The books on his shelf weren't dime novels. They were philosophy, history, technical manuals on engineering and forestry. At night, after dinner, he'd sit by the fire and read while she sewed or wrote letters to her mother. "Why did you agree to marry me?" Clara asked one evening, unable to contain her curiosity any longer. Magnus looked up from his book, surprised by the question. He was silent so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Your father came to me 6 months ago, said he was losing the ranch, needed capital to survive, offered a business partnership, and demanded you marry me as part of the deal." "Yes." Magnus closed the book. "I told him no. Told him I'd loan him the money outright, no strings, but he's a proud man. Wouldn't accept charity. Said the only honorable way was marriage, combining families through proper channels." Clara's jaw clenched. That sounded exactly like her father. "So why did you finally agree?" Magnus's gray eyes met hers, and for the first time, she saw something vulnerable there. "Because I'm 34 years old. I've spent half my life alone on this mountain, and I'm tired of being alone." He paused. "Your father showed me your photograph. You looked kind. I thought maybe kind would be enough." The honesty of it stole Clara's breath. "Am I?" she asked softly. "Kind enough?" "You're more than kind," Magnus said quietly. "You're brave. You walked into fire rather than let your family burn. That's not kindness. That's strength." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. No one had ever called her strong before. That night, for the first time, she didn't lock the bedroom door, but peace in Redemption Valley was as fragile as spring ice. On the 10th day of their marriage, a rider came up the mountain. Clara was hanging laundry when she saw him, a lean man with dark hair, expensive clothes, and a gun belt that had seen real use. "Mrs. Thornwood?" he called, dismounting. Clara's instincts screamed danger. "My husband isn't here." "I know. I came to see you." He removed his hat, but the gesture felt mocking. "Name's Nathaniel Price. I'm an attorney from Denver. I have some information you need to hear. Whatever business you have, you can discuss with my husband." "Your father lied to you." Price's voice cut like a blade. "About the ranch, about the land, about everything." Clara froze. Price reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a leather folder. "Jacob Henderson doesn't own that property. Never did. The land was deeded to his brother, your Uncle Samuel, 20 years ago as payment for war service. Samuel died without heirs 2 years back, and the deed reverted to federal trust. Your father's been squatting on government land, pretending it's his to sell." The world tilted under Clara's feet. That's impossible. "We've lived there my whole life. Living somewhere doesn't make it yours." Price opened the folder, showed her official documents with seals and signatures. "I represent the actual claimant to that land, a gentleman who has legal deed through proper channels. Your father's ranch, all his contracts, including his agreement with Magnus Thornwood, all built on lies, Clara's mind raced. If the land isn't his, then the marriage contract is worthless. Price smiled, and it was cold as a January creek. Magnus Thornwood married you under false pretenses. The land rights he thought he was gaining don't exist. The business merger is void, which means, Mrs. Thornwood, your husband has every legal right to annul this marriage and demand compensation for fraud. The folder slipped from Clara's numb fingers. Why are you telling me this? Because my employer is a businessman. He's willing to settle. If Magnus Thornwood signs over his timber mill contracts to us, we'll let your father walk away clean. No charges of fraud, no public humiliation, just a quiet transfer of assets. Price's eyes were hard. But if Magnus refuses, we'll take everything, the mill, the contracts, and we'll see Jacob Henderson in prison for fraud and forgery. Clara couldn't breathe. What do you want me to do? Convince your husband to take the deal. Price mounted his horse. You have 3 days. After that, the offer expires and the federal marshals get involved. He rode away, leaving Clara standing in the mountain meadow, her world in ruins around her. Magnus came home that evening to find Clara sitting on the porch steps, her face blank with shock. He was off his horse in seconds. What happened? Are you hurt? My father lied. Clara's voice was hollow. About everything. The land. It was never his. Our marriage, everything you thought you were getting, it was all built on fraud. She told him everything. The documents, the threats, the 3-day deadline. When she finished, Magnus was silent for a long time. Then he did something that shocked her. He threw back his head and laughed. Not cruelly, but with genuine bitter amusement. Of course, he said. Of course it was too good to be true. A fresh start, a partner, someone to share this life with. He shook his head. Mountains don't care about contracts, Clara, but they also don't lie. Maybe I should have stayed up here where things make sense. I'm sorry, Clara whispered. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. Neither did I. Magnus sat heavily beside her. So what do you want to do? Me? Clara stared at him. Don't you mean what do you want to do? I'll understand if you want the annulment. God knows you didn't sign up for this mess. I signed up for you? Magnus's voice was quiet but firm. That attorney's right. Technically, legally, I could walk away. Get the marriage dissolved, maybe even sue your father. He looked at her with those frost-colored eyes. But here's what I know. You didn't lie to me. You were honest from the start. And these past 10 days. Clara, I've been less alone than I've been in 15 years. That's worth more than any contract. Clara's throat tightened. But your mill, your business. If you don't sign over the contracts, then we fight. Magnus stood, offering his hand. Your father made mistakes, bad ones, but you're not your father. And I'll be damned if I let some Denver lawyer destroy what we're building just because the paperwork's messy. Clara took his hand, let him pull her to her feet. What are we building? Magnus smiled. A real smile, the first she'd ever seen from him. It transformed his entire face. Don't know yet, but I'd like to find out, if you're willing. Clara thought about her father's betrayal, about the terror she'd felt at the altar, about the gentle giant who'd given her freedom when he could have taken everything, about 10 quiet evenings by the fire and a man who'd rather be alone than cruel. Yes, she said. I'm willing. Good. Magnus squeezed her hand gently. Because we've got 3 days to figure out how to beat Nathaniel Price at his own game. And I don't plan on losing. As they walked back into the cabin together, neither of them noticed the figure watching from the tree line. A figure who'd followed Price up the mountain, a figure who'd heard every word, and who now had information worth more than all the timber in Wyoming. The truth was about to get a whole lot more complicated. To be continued.